Excellent. Thank you so much for that introduction, Josh, and thank you everyone for sticking with us. I know it's a very long online day of Zooms, but it's very nice to see 121 people join for this exciting research update across the board. So, as Josh mentioned, my name is Dr. Emily Bick. I am the Field and Forage Crops Extension Specialist in the Department of Entomology. So, basically, all I do is think about bugs. In entomology today, we're going to be walking through some field crop updates. Let's see if we can. There we go. See a nice picture of my student doing some sweep network on the right over here. Today, we're going to be talking about some kind of resistance research updates. Corn rootworm has been a major issue in terms of resistance. All the big ag companies are well aware and are doing some active testing. My lab has run some active testing for the last couple of years on corn rootworm as well. European corn borer is another massive issue. It's an kind of a what is old is new again type situation. This is a pest that was really well handled by BT traits around 19 in the late 1990s, and unfortunately has been shown to develop resistance across a whole range of cry traits. Um, Also, after that, I want to talk through a emerging pest, soybean gall midge. If you haven't heard about it, that's probably good right now. It's been knocking down soybean fields over the last couple years in kind of southwest Minnesota and Nebraska and Iowa and Kansas, a little bit in Illinois, but it has not made it to our state yet, which is a good thing, but definitely on the horizon. And then finally, I'll talk about some new extension tools. Last year, my lab, alongside the Department of Ag Trade Consumer Protections, launched the Insect Pest Text Alert System, which sent out some texts about location-specific or region-specific insect issues that you might be dealing with. I'll talk through some of that information, as well as an idea that we're going to be launching in the new year called SlugNet as a way to try to grapple what's going on with slugs in this state. So thanks again for sticking with us so far. So corn rootworm, I know everyone here has had experience with corn rootworm. Over the last couple days, I asked folks in the audience to raise their hand if they were doing something to control for rootworm, and about 2/3 of every single room I talked to, folks in those rooms raised their hands. Corn rootworm is a massive issue because the larvae feed on the root zones, mitigate or minimizing some of that nutrients uptake from corn roots. But really, the major issue is less on nutrients and more on corn stability. So you need kind of two major things to happen if you're worried about corn rootworm or for the corn rootworm to cause those damage, kind of the lodging damage. First, you need fairly high pressure in your field. So you need a lot of feeding damage to kind of uh, dramatically reduce the stability of those individual corn plants. And then you also need an element of weather, right? So you need wind to come in, you need a fair amount of rain, and that will cause lodging, which will cause the corn plants to knock over, and then start growing straight up. So it'll almost do that like gooseneck type behavior. We're dealing with majorly we're dealing with these two major species. So we're looking at northern corn rootworm, which is the tiny green beetle. Western corn rootworm is the more yellow one. We also have southern corn rootworm here, but that's only about 5% of the beetles in your field, especially those larval beetles. And that's much more of a generalist. In other crops, it's called um, spotted cucumber beetle. There's also a Mexican corn rootworm, but that doesn't get up much more north than Texas, so we don't have to worry about that one. They all fall under the same genus. They're all Diabrotica species, which means that their behavior is fairly in sync. Their life cycle is fairly in sync. They overwinter as eggs in the soil. They might even undergo some extended diapause or hibernation during that winter time period, which means they might be overwintering, especially if they're northern, for more than one season. They hatch in June. I think like June 1st is a really good understanding of when that hatching date happens, though it has a lot to do, and in fact, most to do with soil temperature. So that date can shift back and forth a little bit. Like anything biological, it kind of goes through a nice little curve. So you've got some kind of early, eager hatchers, and then you've got the vast bulk of them hatching around that like early June, June 10th date or so. They start feeding on the roots. They're entirely moving through the soil. Um, they don't move very far. So basically where the eggs are laid is about the crop that they're going to be feeding on. They cycle through those three instars as they kind of grow. They start really itty bitty and they grow um, to yeah, like a slightly less than a quarter of an inch or so in size. And then around July 1st, they start pupating, right? So their entire season is done by July 1st. They pupate in the soil, and then late July, early August, you'll start to see those massive beetle emergences. And I should say those beetles are feeding on the leaves, they're notching them, they're doing some chomping, but that is not where the vast majority of the economic damage happens. And it is in almost all cases not advised to spray for adult beetle numbers. It's not really going to reduce your egg population the next year, and it's not really causing economic damage this year, from what research has found. And I should say companies are fairly concerned, right? We're talking about resistance here. There's been resistance reported to a whole suite of GMO treats, a whole suite of in-furrow insecticide applications. Right now, there isn't a rescue treatment for the larva, so unless you plant a seed that has a corn rootworm or below ground root protecting traits, or you apply that in-furrow insecticide application at planting time, you're not going to be able to then go back and sweep through and try to rescue the field if you have a particularly bad corn rootworm problem. You're also likely not going to know until later in the season, until you start to see some of those lodging effects. Or unless you're one of the rare few, like everyone I make in my lab, dig a bunch of roots and pressure wash them and start looking at what that actual damage is. However, I should say there's a fitness cost to that corn rootworm resistance. So the insect literally becomes less fit, less good at doing its normal day-to-day biological processes. And because it's less fit, it takes 4 generations, or in this case, because there's only 1 generation per season for the two bugs we're talking about here, it takes 4 generations to actually lose that resistance trait. So what does that mean? Well, if you start rotating and you rotate off of corn to either other crops for 4 seasons, or if you've got a resistance to a trait and you rotate to insecticides for 4 seasons, or 3 seasons, you're going to completely lose the ability of that insect to um, handle or not respond to that trait or that particular insecticide. So it's really good news that they found that fitness cost, and it means we can actually do something. Now, my lab is continuing kind of in Brian Jensen's footsteps by running these Wisconsin field trials. We tested a fair amount with some bear traits as well as with a whole range of insecticides. This is the result. There'll be a summary on my website, bicklab.com, not too long from now, for the ones that we're able to release. I should say this is done in a field where typically we trap crop, as in we put pumpkins so that we can kind of pull those beetles in. We like get them into the right location. There's a lot of eggs, there's a lot of larvae. But this year, we did not have that much larva. It likely had to do with the amount of rain that we had in the field. So there wasn't that much in terms of insect pressure. Um, Also, this year we tested the VT2P hybrids or GMOs. Those only have above ground traits. They don't have any below ground traits. So I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not, but that treatment number 1, treatment number 5 are only for above ground traits and shouldn't do so well on those below ground or on those in on the corn rootworm like root ratings. We also have Smart Stacks, which has a set of below ground BT traits. And then anything with a pro, like VT4 Pro, which is treatment number 4, or the Smart Stacks Pro, actually has a species, or in this case, genus specific RNAi trait associated with it. individual insect, it's expressing that protein, where BT basically punches a hole in the insect's gut when it's taken a bite or after it's like trying to process the corn roots. RNAi actually disrupts the ability for the insect to do biological processes. So it's a pretty nifty new trait that's in there. And it actually worked fairly well, right? So if you take a look at treatment number 4, BT4 Pro, it was about the same as like the normal Smart Stacks or the Smart Stacks Pro, kind of across the board, which is pretty exciting. So that RNAi trait works really, really well. That being said, the Smart Stacks by itself also seems to work fairly well. Now, we're doing this in a field where we basically are rotating, we're randomizing exactly what part of the field gets what insecticides, we're randomizing what part of the field gets what kind of traded corn treatments. And you guys should know that these beetles are very bad flyers. They're only flying 20 to 50 feet a day, right? So that means that your resistance issues are going to be highly, highly localized. They're going to be in your fields. If you have resistance issues, they'll be from your neighbors' fields, kind of on that landscape level rather than kind of across a region or across the US, like some of the mass migrating moths that we have later. So once again, we didn't see that much of a difference. Both the BT traits here are holding up in my test field, and the RNAi trait is wildly successful by itself in that VT4 Pro. We also didn't see any effect of yield across the board. We didn't see significant differences in lodging, aside from that first kind of below ground or above ground only traded piece there. So once again, there wasn't enough pressure and there wasn't enough environmental conditions after that pressure to cause those major differences. Insecticide resistance has also been reported, and companies are well aware. So we ran this trial with a fair amount of insecticide types. It seems like across the board, the vast majority of these insecticides work. We didn't have much success with Ethos, Elite, LFR. When you look at the root ratings, that's our treatment two. That was about on point with kind of our untreated ones over here. But the main takeaways is at least at Arlington, we're not finding the reported resistance issues, especially under last year's low pressure. But even when we're doing a deep dive into 2023's high pressure, we're not finding those resistance issues. However, because resistance is highly, highly, highly localized, you should be aware that if you're seeing a lot of lodging, which makes it really difficult to combine at the end of the season, right? If you're seeing a lot of kind of downed corn, you should start thinking about those rotations. In our system, the BT traits worked, the RNAi traits worked, Capture Force, Evo, Index all seem to work fairly well. But once again, resistance is so localized, your fields may have significantly greater issues than our fields were having. I'm going to switch gears a little bit to European corn borer. This is a nice, pretty kind of pinkish and tannish moth. It's about half an inch nose to tail, kind of head to bottom of the abdomen. When the wingspan opens up, this insect is about an inch long, so not giant, but also not tiny. You're likely not going to find these unless you're actively trapping with pheromone traps, or if you take a sweep net to a grassy field adjacent to a cornfield, you might be able to find a couple of these European corn borers. However, in 2018, there was resistance to, I think it was actually Cry1F was the first reported resistance, and then since then, more recently, Cry1AB, and then kind of the whole suite of BT traits have had resistance reported, at least in Canada. In Connecticut, there's been a couple of these points of resistance that have been found as well. And unfortunately, looking at a map, we're right in between where they found it in Canada and where they found it in Connecticut. This moth moves a fair amount, which means that resistance issues are coming. Now, we participated in a study this past year to take a look at resistance, and I want to talk to you about that in a little bit. But just to kind of kick us off, to start us off, I want to remind you guys that this insect has been under control since 1996, right? Since those BT trading corn plants were released, this has not been a major issue. So when you're walking your fields, the first thing you're gonna kind of want to keep an eye out for is this window painting effect. You're gonna be walking and the corn's gonna be fairly tall and you're gonna be looking up and you'll see that light can get through in either these pinhole type patterns or kind of streak type patterns. If you see that, the next thing you want to look for is this shotgun pattern of feeding damage. That's what happens when a third instar larva will start feeding through a leaf that's all rolled up. When the leaf unrolls, you get that nice straight line of that shotgun damage is what it's called. If you see that, now is a good time to start looking for that entry point. It's usually right under the node over there. So that's image number C. You might see some dried and split tassels, and that's when you take out your handy dandy pocket knife and start splitting stalks a little bit. Take a look for that, look at that tunneling. You might even find some of that tunneling in the actual corn itself or the point of attachment. You might find some of these larvae feeding on the corn, at which point you know that there will be a major issue. Well, so what are we doing about it, right? We know this thing is likely to become a big issue in the next couple of years, right? And uh we think that it might be the resistance issues might be here already. So we were working with Kelsey Fisher, who's at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. It's the land grant institution. It's for the state of Connecticut. It's the only one that doesn't actually isn't actually associated with the university, so I don't know how they got that particular deal. But Kelsey developed some pheromones. That's what her master's degree was on. She developed some pheromones for trapping European corn borer. Um, so we actually set up some of these funnel traps. We basically dangled a little pheromone, a little attractant, in the bottom of the funnel or in the kind of the funnel part of the funnel traps. Um, we had insects would fly into the bottom, fly up towards the pheromone, and get trapped in the top. And after doing this every single week this past season, we realized we could not find a single European corn borer, at least in our two traps that we had going at Arlington. Now, once again, you can find them if you sweep, but that's kind of good news for the state of Wisconsin. So, what that means is resistance is likely here, but the populations of European corn borer is not quite high enough to cause widespread damage. I would, if I was a betting person, I would put money that in the next 4 years, this absolutely will become an issue. The next thing I want to talk about is soybean gallmage. So this is an issue that causes damage. It's been kind of rocking through the north central region. We have a grant with the North Central Soybean Marketing Board or Checkoff between us and the Department of Ag Trade Consumer Protection StatCap, where we've been we've been looking through fields and scouting fields, and in the last couple of years when we've been looking, we have not yet found soybean gallmage, which is really good news. If you see this kind of desiccated edge of your field, you can start whipping out your pocket knife again and taking a peek. Kind of under the hood in the bottom third of the stalk of the plant, of the stem of the plant. You'll see these little grubs or maggots. They start off as clear, they turn white, they then turn orange. And if you start finding those, I would pick some up, put them in a vial, and mail them off to me or drive them off to me because we should really test to make sure that those are not soybean gallmage. This is particularly a challenge because chemical control it's a particularly challenge because we haven't quite cracked the code on effective chemical control. There's this extended emergence and multiple generations, which means that even though eggs may hatch and we may catch them right at the beginning, it takes a very long time for all of those eggs to hatch, and then they reproduce really, really quickly. We've found, looking at our colleagues in some of the more southern north central states, planting soybeans later in the season reduces infestation, as does mowing borders and tilling. Borders is a potential management tactic, but obviously we lose crop that way. Right now, folks are looking at particularly at foliar insecticides, but efficacy and timing needs to be further studied. And then there's also a group that's looking at genetic resistance. So that's the bad news of the day. The good news is we're developing this tool, or we put into action last year. We had about 200 people sign up for the very first version of the insect pest text alert system. This relies on the on DATCAP's trapping network. It relies on UW-Madison Extension pretty heavily, and then my lab is the one that pushed out this system. DatCap, if you're not aware, has this incredible trapping network of pheromones, of sweeping fields. They put out some really good material on this. This is Krista Hamilton's group that does it. And then they report that data into a couple different systems. They have some graphics on their own website, but they also have Corn IPM Pipe, where you can, click a county and see what's going on in that particular county. Or you can look at the Great Lakes and Maritime Pest Monitoring Network of 20, this is the 2023 data for this, where you can look at what's happening across the country, kind of across the Great Lakes, and then you can zoom in quite a bit to Wisconsin and see what's happening in terms of moth counts. These things get updated weekly. The data that DATCAP collects goes into a field notes newsletter that Krista puts together. This is kind of a bit of information on what's going on with crops as well as with pests. So it walks through some weather, it walks through some plant progress. It might say 75% of the population planting is complete. It might say something about the insect flight reports, and it'll link out to some more extension information that my lab's been helping update. Josh Camps has been managing the volunteer coordination. So if you're interested in hosting a pheromone trap and helping us out, he is the one to talk to. And thanks, Josh, for running the show today as well as managing these volunteers. Josh identified that we might not be putting these traps in the right location. So he asked my lab, which is a fairly digital focused lab, to look at trapping optimization. So we basically took every single trap that DatCat put out for every single, this is like species specific. We then assigned a site score or asked it how representative of each trap is it of the area around it. And then we found out that the areas in yellow or the areas in green, we could probably do with having more traps. I'm not sure if the most northern part of the state is accurate because there isn't that much corn way, way, way up north. But certainly if you're in the south or in the central part of the state, we would love if you could help volunteer run one of those traps. All materials are provided. It's just your time and effort that's greatly appreciated. So looking at this incredible resource that our state has and looking at kind of the states around us as an example, I found that Iowa State, that Aaron Hodgson's group out of Iowa State runs the Iowa Pest Alert Network. And what they do is they have a particular text that comes out in response to their trapping and sweeping networks. So last year we took kind of the top 10 pests that we thought might be an issue. We ended up only issuing a text over 4 of them because, the armyworms didn't show up in the numbers that, was probably good for everyone except for this alert system. Um, and we took these pests and we asked folks to sign up with a name, a phone, an email, talk about ask about the region that they were in that they cared about so that the text could be relevant to the location that you're located in. We then looked at these pests, we looked at the updates weekly, we talked to DatCat, we talked to Extension, and we sent out an alert only when necessary. And that text went, hey, heads up, go scout. It was linked to a kind of short blog post of an alert page, and it might have had a photo on it. The physical alert page would just have some information about how to scout, what chemicals would be useful, what those thresholds were. And then that was linked to a much deeper resource that my lab's been putting together with some extension folks about the entire life history, everything that you would want to know about that particular pest. We also linked it out to any additional materials, so like the A3646, if you wanted like the full realm of what was possible to spray on there, as well as the field notes and other kind of pertinent resources there. So this is what the sign up page looks like. You can go on my website, bicklab.com/pest alert, and you can sign up today. We're going to likely be expanding the types of pests that we're monitoring. We're still working out those details right now. But folks seem to like the service. Once again, 200 people were able to use the service last year, and we're hoping to continue this going forward. Now, the very last thing I want to talk about is SlugNet. We were very surprised last year when we got a plethora of emails, especially in the conservation, low-till, no-till, or cover cropping systems about slugs. So a group of extension folks and myself have been working to develop a new slug resource, which will be coming out in the new year. Kind of a when slugs are a problem chart, so we're updating some of that information. And then we're also trying to get a handle on how bad of an issue are slugs. So we're putting together in once again for the new year this slug net resource. It's basically going to be a website on my lab page where you can run a shingle trap where you basically take one of those asphalt shingles, you drop it on the ground, you put little pegs in there, and then once a week or every so often you lift up that asphalt shingle. Slugs really like hanging out below there because it's the right microclimate. It's got some good shade. It protects them from predators, and you can take a picture of what's going on under there. And then our little algorithm will count the slugs. It'll start reporting them by county. We're not going to disclose any particular person's GPS location, and we'll ask you about what some of your like conservation practices are if you're using any and how bad that damage is. And this way it'll just help us get a really good handle about how bad slug issues are to date. Anyhow, I think that's my time. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I'm around for questions in the section after next.